Glory be to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one true God. Amen. Welcome everyone to Lecture 4 on Syriac manuscripts. Today we have our esteemed guest, Dr. George Kiraz. He will be talking about church archives, the importance of preserving documents and scraps of paper. Dr. George Kiraz Malfono needs no introduction. He will going to discuss about the archival documents and their importance in the history of the church. And this program will focus on a number of Syriac archives, including the collection of Deir, al-Za'faran Monastery, which was once the seat of the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchate. Malfono, Dr. George Kiraz is the founder and director of Beth Mardutho, the Syriac Institute, the Editor-in-Chief of Gorgias Press, Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Advanced Studies, Princeton. He earns his M.Sc degree in Syriac Studies from the University of Oxford, M.Phil and Ph.D. from the University of Cambridge. He published extensively in the fields of computational linguistics and Syriac studies. With that brief introduction, let me welcome, on behalf of Urho the Way, to Lecture 4 on Syriac manuscripts, titled Church Archives, the Importance of Preserving Documents and Scraps of Paper, and how these scraps of paper important in the history of the church. You can ask questions and comments in the comment section. Dr. George Kiraz will be addressing those questions towards the end of his lecture. Welcome, Malfono.
Thank you very much for inviting me again on your channel.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is a blessed moment. I believe this will complete the discussion, and it will have its own new horizons, and there will be an action component when you talk about the importance of preserving archives and scraps of paper. Now the floor is yours, Malfono.
Thank you so much, and thank you again to the Urho platform for inviting me. I believe this is my second talk with you now, and thank you, Father, for all these efforts. I am trying to now go to my screen and see if I can put it on presentation mode. And if you can give me a second.
Yes, it's all good.
It's all good. All right. So I'm also going to try to see if I can get my laser pointer up. So I don't know if you will be able to see my laser pointer. But today, as Father said, we will be talking about church archives. Now, in this series of Urho talks, there have been a few talks before about manuscripts. On February 5th, His Eminence More Severius Roger talked about the Patriarchal Library manuscripts. And back in February 26th, Father Psherri talked about the manuscripts in the University of Chicago. There was also a talk earlier this month on the 12th by Malfono Ephraim Ishaq about liturgical manuscripts. Now, my talk today is going to be a bit different. All the previous talks were about manuscripts of literary texts. What does literary texts mean? Means it is manuscript. The content is basically either books of theology, of history, or liturgical books, let's say. These are texts that are intended for people to read. But what I'm going to be talking today about is archives. And unlike manuscripts, archives are usually papers such as letters. We used to, now we write emails to each other, or we text, or we WhatsApp. But in the older days, we used to write letters to each other, and people used to write letters to their bishops, to their patriarchs, and these letters have contain a lot of information about what was going on at the time. And the talk today is about these types of documents, not documents, literary documents that were intended as books or as liturgies to be chanted or sung in the church, but rather about these sometimes scraps of paper. And why is it important? About a few years ago, Dr. Khalid Dinno published a book called The Syrian Orthodox Christians in the Late Ottoman Period and Beyond. And you usually have many sources when you write books. One of his sources were these letters, and you see them here on the right. And these letters basically give you information about that period of time. That's why it is important to look into these letters and to preserve these letters. A couple of years ago, I also wrote a book called The Syriac Orthodox in North America, which covered the period between 1895 and 1995. I also relied on magazines and like Intibah, you see it here on the bottom, but you also need to consult the archives. Letters like these letters you see here. These letters are from the Athanasius Yeshua Samuel collection, which are preserved in the diocese. The book would have been far more rich and would have given us more information had we had archives preserved in the parishes, especially the old parishes, such as the Virgin Mary in Paramus, which used to be in West New York, such as our Worcester Church, which had a lot of Harputli immigrants, such as our Detroit Church, which had immigrants from 1905 and 1910 from the Homs area. But unfortunately, all these churches do not have archives. That means whatever letters they used to receive are not preserved. We are lucky sometimes to have some of these letters because they were published in the magazines. But letters that were not published in magazines are no longer there. They are not preserved. And that is a bit of a problem if you are going to write the history of a place and you have no archival record. During the COVID year, 2020, I wrote my memoirs, Water the Willow Trees, Memoirs of a Bethlehem Boyhood. And while I do remember things about my childhood, and that's what I was writing, a lot of things from memory, but what made it possible to write this book is archives. My father archives. He was a big archivist, my father. We used to make a joke that he is a minister and he's running a ministry because he used to save every single piece of paper. And my mom had a few notebooks. And from her notebooks, I could reconstruct things. And I also have had my own archive. The sheets of paper you see here are things that I wrote when I was a teenager. And I didn't throw them. I brought them with me to the United States. For example, the one here on the top right, apparently I forgot about that. But apparently when I was 14 or 15, I thought of writing my memories as a child, and I wrote a few pages. Those were helpful to me now because I forgot about them, and the stories that are in these sheets I have completely forgotten about. If it wasn't for these sheets, I won't be able to write the story in the book. Here is a list of some of the books that I had at the time. Then I am able to reconstruct how I built my library. My father also had a list of the books he had, which got incorporated into my library. And this is how I could now reconstruct the beginning of my collection, which basically ended up being now the Beth Mardutho collection because my books are now present in the Beth Mardutho library. When I was a kid, I built this altar, and I was a teenager at the time, and I remember that, and I wrote about it. But there is a sheet of paper in my archives about the architectural plans. I drew it, and now I have more information to tell you about how I built this altar, not because I remember these plans, I don't remember them, but because I have these archives. And that's why it is important to preserve papers and scraps of papers sometimes. And scholars are interested in this. In 2005, we had a trip to Tur Abdin where I took a number of graduate students and scholars, and we went to the Tur Abdin area. This is one of the churches that we visited, which was under construct or under remodeling. And you see here Professor Jonathan Loopstra. He was a graduate student at the time, and he found these bags of documents. And here's a partial picture of what was inside this bag. And of course, this is not a state to keep an archive, but this bag may contain important information about the history of that parish and of that locality. Of course, we were in that church for 15, 20 minutes. We didn't have time to look and to work into this archive. But it's important to preserve these documents. So today I'm going to be talking to you about one major archive, and I will mention a bit others, but this is the main topic of our talk, is the archive of the documents that are in Deir al-Za'faran in Mardin. Our patriarchs used to reside there, and the library has a few boxes of letters. These are the letters that were sent to the patriarchs. There are letters from Patriarch Elias II until Elias III, so covering the period between 1838 and 1932. Having said that, most of the letters there cover the Patriarchate of Peter III, or we know him as Peter IV. After he died as Peter III, but after he died, the list was revised, and he is called Peter IV, or we know him as Peter IV. I would say that at least 80% of the documents belong to Patriarch Peter III. So what kind of documents are there? There are letters, such as this letter here on the top. About 8,000 of these letters. There are hundreds, a few hundred telegrams. After letters, telegrams came into the area in the late 1800s. And now you see here on this side, on the top left, this red document, that's a telegram. On top of that, there are a number of financial booklets. Here is one here on the bottom. About a dozen of these financial booklets. And there are about 110 church diagrams, architectural diagrams of the churches of the Tur Abdin era. As you can tell, all of these are sheets of paper. They're not manuscripts, they're not bound books, but their content is really, really important. And they tell us about the life of the Syriac church in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. If you look at this map, this is a Google map, but I put here some marks of where the Suryoye lived. Basically from Kharput here in the north, down to Jerusalem in the south, from Mosul in the east to Aleppo or Homs or Damascus in the West. And of course, we should not forget that there is a community way down here, which is in India. So people from these localities are writing to the patriarch about various things. And the contents of these letters are very important to study not only the history of the church, but also the life of the people. Now we talk about about history bottom up. Bottom up means from the bottom to the top. If the top is the patriarch, or in the case of a state, if the top is the sultan or the emperor, then the people on the bottom are the regular people in the street, and it's about their lives, and we can learn a lot about them from these letters. So a bit of statistics from a sample of these letters. Who wrote these letters? On the right here, you will see the name of the patriarch. And as I said, most of the letters are addressed to Patriarch Peter. And here on the left, the rank of who is writing. So most of them come from individuals, not from bishops. Most of the letters are coming from individuals. And that's why it's important to learn about the life of the people. But there are bishops who are writing. There are many means a petition signed by many people. There are deacons who are writing. There are priests who are writing. There are monks who are writing. And, few others down here. But as I learned, it is not easy to know sometimes who is writing, something that I discovered while looking at these documents. And if you look at the top left document here, this is a letter that is in Gershuni, and it is signed here. If you look at this line, for those who can read Syriac, there is a Ain, Allah, Abdullah. So this is written by Abdullah, and on the last line, Deiroyo, by the monk Abdullah. And there are a number of these letters by this monk Abdullah. And by reading it, I realized that this is the same Abdullah that became Patriarch Abdullah later. He is writing to Patriarch Peter. But as I was going through these documents and looking at the dates, there is here 1889, I said, wait a minute. Abdullah Deiroyo, 1889, I think by this time he's a bishop. So I went and I looked up his biography, and indeed he's a bishop. He was consecrated bishop in 1872, about more than 10 years, about more than 15 years even, before this letter was written. He is a bishop, and he is signing a Deiroyo. Then I found another letter by another Deiroyo Dinha. And this particular letter also had the stamp of this Deiroyo Dinha. And clearly in his stamp, it's in Arabic, it says Mutran Dinha, Bishop Dinha. So now I have two letters by Deiroye monks who are signing Deiroye, but it looks like when they are writing these letters, they are bishops. And then I found this letter by two deacons, Shammas Ibrahim, Deacon Ibrahim, and Shammas Hanna. And also I have their stamps. And their stamps are in Arabic, Rabban Ibrahim and Rabban Yohanna. What's going on? So it looks like during that period of time, when you are writing a letter to the patriarch, you humble yourself and you lower your rank by one. So if you are a bishop, you don't sign bishop, you sign Deiroyo. If you are a Deiroyo or a priest, you sign as Shammas. This is one way of you humbling yourself when you write to the patriarch, and we will see other phrases in the documents of humbling. oneself. In what languages are these documents written? Well, we have to ask not only in what languages, but in what scripts. Again, we have here the names of the patriarchs, and we have here the names of the languages and the scripts. By far, most of the documents are written in Syro-Arabic. Syro-Arabic means Syriac script, Arabic language. Gershuni. So the letter is in Arabic, but not in the Arabic script. It is in the Gershuni script. It is in the Syriac script. Then next comes the letters in Arabic in the Arabic script. Then come the letters that are in Syro-Ottoman, which means it is in Turkish, but in the Syriac script. Again, Gershuni. Then we have letters in Syriac, in the Syriac language, and in the Syriac script, obviously. And notice, it's not the majority. So most people are not writing in Syriac. Something we would have expected maybe that people are writing in Syriac, but they're not. And then comes Ottoman. Ottoman means it is Turkish in the Turkish script. And then there are a few things on the bottom. There are a few in Malayalam, there are a few in Armenian, but the vast majority are the top ones here. From where are these letters coming? And here I have the languages on the left mapped to the places. Okay. Most of them, the place not is unknown. We have not done the research to figure out the place. Most of the letters don't say where it is from. So you really have to read the letter to figure out where it is written from. But from some of them, we are able to tell where they're coming from. They're coming from Diyarbakir, from Nusaybin, from Istanbul. Quite a good number are coming from Tur Abdin. Look on the top, some are coming from Urfa, some are coming from India. Notice that the ones are coming from India, if you follow this, are written in the Syriac language, while most of the others are written in the Syro-Arabic, which means it is Arabic, but it is in Gershuni. So now we are in the late 1800s. The patriarchs are receiving these letters. Do we know anything about the milieu, about the culture of letter sending and letter receiving in that period of time? We are lucky that we have a few references in the literature. In 1934, Ishaq Armala, who is a Syriac Catholic core episcopos, wrote a book in Arabic. And in this book, there is a very important passage about the postal system in Mardin. It is written in the context of why the Syriac Catholics moved their center from Mardin to Lebanon. One of the reasons that he gives is the postal office. Here's an English translation of that Arabic paragraph. The mail office in Mardin was of one room administered by one employee who knew only Arabic with a bit of Turkish. This employee was completely ignorant of foreign languages. Additionally, the mail was delivered to and from Mardin but twice a month during the Patriarchate of Ignatios Anton, this is the Syriac Catholic Patriarch, then weekly during the Patriarchate of Ignatios Philip. When the mail arrived in that city, the letters were thrown on the floor and would remain there until the recipients picked them up. If one was late in fetching the mail, it was eventually burned and destroyed. So it was not a very reliable mail system at the time of the late 1800s. So we are lucky that we have these 8,000 documents in Mardin. And the reason we have them is that while some of them did come through the postal system, And we know that because some letters will say, we sent you earlier a letter through the post. But we also have letters that say, oh, we sent you earlier a letter through this person, but we did not receive the reply yet. So we know that they were also sending letters through people. We have another testimony by Perry, who is from the West, and he visited Oswald Perry. He visited the Patriarchate in the 1890s during the Patriarchate of Patriarch Peter. And here he tells us in his travelogue what he was doing. He was in Mosul and he was delivering letters. But one time he entered the Patriarchate and he is describing how Patriarch Peter received the letters. The Patriarch was sitting at the farther end of a long apartment. I advanced, dropped on one knee, and kissed his hand, after which, rising and retreating a few paces, I drew forth the parcel from Mosul, approached, and presented it. So he was in Mosul before. That means people in Mosul, when they are writing letters to the Patriarch, they are stacking them until somebody is going to Mardin and they say, please take these to the Patriarch. That's how the letters got there. The Patriarch beckoned me to a seat opposite, and when he had read the address on the envelope, looked towards me and, laying his hand on his heart, bade me welcome. The Patriarch then opened the packet and was soon absorbed in reading the epistles. And when he had finished, which was not till half an hour had elapsed, he folded them again and thrust them under his carpet amidst a multitude of other epistles and papers. This gives us a picture of how the Patriarch was receiving letters. There is another passage from Perry describing the diwan, that means the office of the Patriarch. A visit of an hour or more to the Patriarchate became part of every day's proceedings. From morning till night, men came and went, some with business, political, or ecclesiastical to transact, others on visits of compliment, bishops of other communities, or Muslim officials of the town. Then there was the set of men for whom the diwan was the recognized place for meeting, the priests of the church, the deacons, and the chief men of the Syrian community. Morning service over, several of them always came and sat with the Patriarch for a time, gave him the news, discussed the affairs of the nation, or, and here it's important about the mail, or, if it was mail day, heard the content of His Holiness's correspondence. So he was reading the letters aloud with the people around him. For there was little privacy there, and everyone, except he were a Muslim or a member of a rival Christian community, sat to hear the letters read aloud. So this is the culture that surrounded these letters we are going to be looking at. So let's look at some letters and see what we can learn from them. This is a letter that is really, really unexpected. This is a letter from Patriarch Jacob II to Mar Shimon the 17th of the Church of the East. As we know, these two churches are not in communion. In fact, the Syriac Orthodox Church and the Church of the East are on the peripheries of the Christological controversies. They are as far from each other as it can be when it comes to theology, but not culturally, not linguistically. So here, that means that we had communication between the two churches. And this is very interesting because the Patriarch is writing to Mar Shimon, and although we don't have the letter of Mar Shimon, at least I did not see it, he is citing that we received your letter from which you are asking us to take care of your flock in our lands. And this is very important for today's ecumenism. As I said, these two churches are not in communion with each other. But the Patriarch of the Church of the East, Mar Shimon, not having priests anymore in the western regions of Mardin, the Turabdin, and these areas, but clearly he has parishes, he has people there. And he is asking the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch, please take care of my people. That means you will be in charge of them in terms of baptisms, weddings, funerals. You take care of them. And this is something that can show us that ecumenism is not only a 20th century thing. It did take place, maybe not through dialogues and official conferences, but it did take place in earlier periods. Some letters tell us about the linguistic background of the Syriac. Most of them we see from the letters did not write in Syriac. And in order to study these documents, you need to know many languages. Look at this letter. It is in Gershuni. The letter mostly is in Turkish. But the blue on the top is Syriac. Usually you address the bishop, the patriarch, in Syriac. But there is a word here, Sayyidna. Sayyidna Ma'alyo. Sayyidna is Arabic. These pinkish words are Persian or Iranian, loan words into Turkish. Sirtajimiz, the crown of our head. Sirtajimiz. You know, when you write a letter, you always write, I kiss your hands. And there was this word with simkath waw rish fa, sorf. And it took me a while. I looked at all the Ottoman dictionaries. I asked in Princeton University, the Ottoman specialists, what is this word? Nobody could figure it out. And then I put it on Facebook, I think. And Sayyidina Joseph Bali, he said, could it be Armenian sorp? Holy. I kiss your holy hands. And indeed, it was Armenian. So you need to know many languages to understand these documents. And usually they end with Syriac, Barich Mor al Shubqono, here on the bottom. Another document here is in Arabic. Alayhi bikhusus, these are Arabic words. But in the middle of it, there is a switch of the script from Gershuni to the Arabic script. Why? The context of this letter, a bishop is writing to the patriarch, I believe it was Bishop Dinha, and he is complaining. Many people in my parish are against me. And then he wants to say to the patriarch, not their names, but there are other people whom you know. And he wanted to emphasize whom you know. Today we will do it in italic, in bold, we will put underline. But in order to emphasize it, he switched the script to the Arabic script. You know, other people whom you know. Probably he means these are other people who are the friends of the patriarch. They're also against me. He doesn't want to name them. So he switches the script to make it italics. This is very interesting. Here is the letter also in Arabic. But this letter has some words that today when people write in Arabic, they are in color here, they will not use such words. Chunki or chunku, haqsız. These are Turkish words. So although the text could be in Arabic, and it will not be in standard Arabic. If you read this. If you know Arabic, you will notice this is not standard Arabic. There's a lot of colloquial language there. So these are some of the challenges in reading these documents. So let's talk now about the structure of these documents. What do they contain? Usually, a letter or a petition will start with the addressee, naming the person to whom you are writing. Today you will say, Dear Mr. Such and Such. Yeah. So they will start with formulae like in the name of the Lord your guardian. We will talk about these different parts of the letter. Then there is the preamble, like after kissing your hand. Today, when you write to someone, the first sentence, I hope you are doing well, we are doing well. These are the niceties. Then comes the actual petition, the actual content. The petition presented to the doorstep of your holiness is that, blah, blah, blah. Now the business comes. And then at the end comes the closing. Something like, it is for this purpose that we penned these letters of servitude to you. And this is a phrase that is very important. We talked about humbling oneself. The bishop is calling himself Dairoyo. Also, these words that they write, they call it the letters of servitude. We are your servant. And when we say we received your letters, usually they will say, we received the letter of blessings from you. So the letter that they receive from the patriarch is the letter of blessing, and the letter that they write, they call it letter of servitude. Also, we have in some of these documents, we've received your letters and we all read it. That means the community read it. And then we passed it and we all kissed it. So when they used to receive the letter of the patriarch, today in churches, we are used to receiving the encyclical from the patriarch. We all stand, a deacon holds the moronitho, the staff. But in the old days, they used to pass the letter and people used to kiss the letter as well. And then comes the signature, something like the seeker of your holiness's prayers, the miserable such and such. Again, things to humble oneself, like the miserable. So now I want to go through these portions and give you some examples of these letters. Here is the addressee. To the holiness of the sublime Lord and the noble shepherd, Moran Mor Ignatios, Patriarch Peter Effendi. Effendi is an Ottoman title. The honored one, may his leadership last and may his holiness be elevated. Amen. This is the top here. Yeah. Other ones would be, after all of this, Ignatios, head and general shepherd of the old Syrians, Peter, who is Shimon Kifa, that means who's like St. Peter, the thrice blessed. Other documents will be, in the name of the Lord, the protector and elevator of the rank of your priesthood, our father, Moran Mor Ignatios, patriarch of the apostolic see of Antioch, who is Peter. These are the types of formulae that are here on the top. Then comes the preamble, the niceties. After kissing your holy fingertips and pure feet, seeking your virtuous petitions, and continuously petitioning the Lord of mankind to keep the days of your lordship as long as the stars circulate and the rivers flow. Amen. As you can see, this is literature sometimes. Here's another one. After kissing your holy hands and pure feet, ... and then Moran Mor Ignatios, 5th among the evangelists, 13th amongst the disciples, 73rd among the apostles, 319th of the holy fathers. That means they are giving him the title. There are 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are calling him the 5th of the evangelists, the 13th of the 12 disciples, the 73rd of the 72 apostles, and 319 of the 318 fathers who were in the Council of Nicaea. As you can see, this is really literature. Then comes the actual petition. It starts also with formulae like this. The presentation to the doorsteps of your lordship is that for 4 times we do not receive the letters of blessings regarding your son Monk Saliba. So 4 times they wrote to the Patriarch about Monk Saliba, but they did not receive an answer yet. And see here, they call the letter that they're expecting to receive from the Patriarch the letters of blessings from you. And then the business comes. What kind of business are in these letters? So here are some summaries, just to give you an idea. One letter is from Qas Ibrahim, a priest called Ibrahim, who died. It's not from him, it's about him. This priest died without inheritance. They're reporting that to the Patriarch, and they are also reporting some financial reports of the monastery from which this letter was sent. Another letter is a dispute of a village with the local Qaimaqam. The Qaimaqam is the government representative. A bishop reports a dispute about the ordination of a priest. There is a dispute with the local priest regarding the rent income of a house. This tells us about the life and the rents and the amounts of rents. From Sa'rt, the community is in dispute with the local Kurds. So that tells us about the life of the community vis-a-vis the other communities in the area. Community has a problem with the kind of oppressors. I think he means the Catholics, the people who are becoming Catholics. Case was presented to the local Qadi, that means to the local judge, and to the local Qaimaqam, the government representative. Here are other summaries. From Jerusalem, a letter about a dispute with the Armenians regarding the keys to a cupboard. And one of the students from Yale who studied this looked at this letter even further. This is a story worth telling. As some of you may know, there is always dispute among the communities in the holy places. And the Syriac Church was under the patronage of the Armenian Church. Also, the Copts and the Ethiopians are under the Armenians during Ottoman times. And even somewhat until today, this persists. So this letter is writing to the Patriarch, complaining that the Armenians came to our church in the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and they changed the key, and our stuff is inside this cupboard, of course. And there was a big dispute about it. And they went and they talked to the Armenians about it. Then they didn't get anywhere, so they went to the Greeks to ask the Greeks for help. The Greeks promised to write to the Greek Patriarchate of Istanbul to present the material to the Ottoman Sultan. The Armenians also wrote, this letter reports, to their Patriarchate in Istanbul for their own side of the story, so that the Armenian Patriarchate in Istanbul will petition the Sultan, of course, for the Armenians in that case. And you can see that something like this becomes more kind of an international problem. So this letter is writing to the Patriarch, please write to the Sultan to take a decision that will be for our own advantage so we can get the key back. And Henry Clement, the student from Yale, noticed a phrase here that, this problem can all be solved not only with the power of God, but also with all the people need to support us in order to get our right back. This phrase in highlighted. And Henry Clement went further to the Ottoman archive to see are there any documents there. And he found documents like this on the left. These are from the Ottoman archive. Few lines only on the top. See how many signatures are there. He found letters from Homs, from Damascus, from Edessa, Urfa, from Mosul, all writing to the Ottoman Sultan. We no longer want to be subjugated to the Armenians. We want to be our own millet. That means we want to be our own nation within the Ottoman system, having our own representative. And this is something that Patriarch Peter III tried a lot to remove the Syriac Orthodox from under the jurisdiction of the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul. Our church history says that he gained millet status for the Syriac church. But the letters in this archive are to the contrary. There are letters later in the archive that come from Istanbul, from the Syriac bishop in Istanbul, saying, please pay the accounts to the Armenian Patriarch. He is waiting. The Syriacs had to pay taxes like any other community, but again, through the Armenian Patriarchate. So it looks like Patriarch Peter did not 100% succeed in making the Syrianis a millet, but only succeeded in having a representative, a bishop, who is able to go and talk directly with the Sultan and his offices. And it is interesting that this cupboard is still there in Jerusalem, and the key is with the Syriac church today. So it looks like that the problem was resolved in favor of the Syriac church. So now the Syriacs have their things there. But unfortunately, a few years after this, it seems, and we know this from a manuscript in Jerusalem, the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem managed to kick out the Syriacs from their church in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Syriac church has rooms above the chapel. That's where the monks used to live. And the Copts have their own rooms, the Armenians have their place, the Greeks have their place, and the Latins. We are the only church today, the Syriac church, with rooms, but with nobody occupying these rooms. We are only allowed to occupy these rooms during 1 week, which is the week of Passion Week. Sometimes you see on Facebook, Deiroyo Boulos from Jerusalem. During that week at night, he's there and he shows you some videos when he is staying there. But in the late 1800s, we had residents there. So that is still under dispute. And the ownership of the church, of course, is still under dispute. The Syriac church claims these are our rooms and this is our church. The Armenian church claims custodianship, of course, to these rooms. So these documents help us understand these disputes as well. In addition to church things, there are documents, again, about people. There is seeking approval of the engagement of a boy and a girl. It looks like during that time, even an engagement required the approval of a patriarch. From Jazeera, our kids are being educated by the Catholics and the British. Someone donated the money for us to open a school, but we need money for books. Another one from Kharput. Waqf and school are bankrupt. We need financial help. A letter from Nisibis. we are seeking the approval for the ordination of a priest. And there are many matters like this. There are also letters, for example, from Kharput, appointing someone to the majlis in the court. The Ottomans made a revision of the constitution, and each court uh, had to have civil representatives from the various communities: the Greeks, the Armenians, the Syrianis, of course, the Syriacs, and Jews. So these also required approval. Who is going to represent in Kharput the Syriac community in the court? It's like similar to our jury system in the United States. There's a letter of monks complaining about lack of food, about heating in the monastery, and they're complaining about their abbot. And they're signed by Deir, all of them signing as Shammas, as deacon. A letter from India to Patriarch Abdul Masih, asking the Patriarch to visit India to consecrate bishops, as the bishops consecrated by Patriarch III have already died or are very old. A letter from Diyarbakir. There is a change in the Mutasarrif. He is a governmental official. They're basically informing him about local politics, informing the Patriarch. The Mutasarrif change, please send a letter to congratulate him. So these are the sorts of letters that are in this archive. And the whole idea of this talk is to give you the moral of the story. Don't throw papers. In your parish, keep them. In your bishoprics, keep them. It is very important to keep all these documents. They are the history. Without them, one cannot write the history of the people, the history of the church, the history of the local social and political system. So much is in these letters. Unfortunately, one time a priest told me, "Oh, I came to this parish and there's so many old papers. I cleaned up the altar. Because they are holy papers, I burned them. I didn't want to put them in the trash." But when you burn these letters, history is burned. So we need to keep these letters. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer any questions. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Malfono. This is really interesting. As promised, this talk, this lecture has given eyes, ears, hands, and legs to manuscripts, scraps of paper, what the present generation need to do. It's not about talking or studying the manuscripts, but to preserve and to organize the present stakeholders, what they need to do, especially in bishop's office, in big churches, and even small churches as well. So how they need to preserve the documents in order to understand the culture, in order to understand the conversations, in order to understand the linguistics, in order to understand the theology, the practices of people, and the pertinent, important things that are in the church. And this need to be preserved not just for the generation, but the generations to come. Malfono, do you have any specific suggestions how to draw the thin line, not to hoard things, but at the same time maybe to digitize the manuscripts before holy papers are being burned or holy papers are being buried without looking into the content or without preserving. So sometimes people do say that there is too many things, but how can we digitize? Is there any practical suggestions, especially those who are leading, those who can involve in the church with the digitization? Even in our small church, we can see that there are a lot of people have hoarded things, but how can we go about digitizing?
So let's start with the organization and the preservation, not throwing things first. Every bishopric, and this lies in the hands of the bishop, every parish which lies in the hands of the priest and also the trustees, and even organizations, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, clubs, whatnot, you must have a filing system. You must have a filing system where you preserve these documents. And when you are no longer the person in charge, this needs to move to the next person. That means if you're a bishop, it needs to move to the next bishop. Same thing with the parish. It needs to move to the next parish so that it is preserved. This is the most important thing before we talk about even digitization and whatnot. Because when it is there, then it's possible to start talking about digitization. If there's a parish that already has an archive, then it is important to digitize it. And today you can use your camera. The cameras are of such high quality today. But then we have to think about, you can contact us, we can help you where to save them. There's no point of digitizing it and then saving it on a hard drive and then you throw the hard drive, or the hard drive after 10 years cannot be read. But also there is something that is very important, uh, and that is access. Unlike literary manuscripts, it is not easy to give full access to anybody about these documents, because, and I'm going to mention this from the archive here in New Jersey that I looked at for writing the history of North America. Usually, a letter comes from the priest to the, let's say, to the bishop, and there is some information about the parish which could be very informative for me writing my book. But usually, letters have many topics. Also, he's talking about a family that there's some divorce going on, either seeking approval or this and that. These are private matters. They cannot be made public. Now, in the case of the archive of Mardin, it's not a problem because the archive is over 100 years old. But in the case of the New Jersey archive that I looked at, letters from the 60s and 70s and 80s, I even know some of these families. Such things cannot be made public, can be digitized, but has to be kept private. And when a scholar is given access, the scholar has to be responsible. And usually, scholars are. Usually, scholars who work on these things, sometimes they are not allowed by their universities to work on these things without going through special training about privacy, even if they interview you about privacy and these types of things. You have to know, what can I publish, what can I not publish. You cannot start publishing about people's dirty business, in quotes, dirty business. And then the other question is what to keep and what to throw. If you are an organization, you cannot throw anything. Sometimes I have here, I'm going to show it to you next to me. I have my, this is where my recycling in my office. When it fills, I throw it. And every time I throw it, I feel guilty. These are my scraps of paper. Here's a little scrap of paper. It will tell me what I was working on this week, right? This is, scraps of paper about me editing things, and then I correct them, and then I throw the draft. I mean, in my business, I cannot keep everything. If I keep all these scraps, I need to find the house for all these things. Important things I keep. And every time I throw them, I feel guilty, that I'm throwing something. But important things I cannot throw. They are filed, and you have to make a judgment call.
Right. I mean, so can you suggest, like, when you digitize things, how you organize, like, maybe you are a pioneer with digitization. So what labels you create for the folders and how you organize, just out of curiosity. Maybe
Yes, yes.
people need to not to reinvent the wheel, like, just go with the lessons that you have.
So I personally, because I don't have the time, and for example, the digitization of the Mardin archive was not funded. It's not like I have assistance. Um, it took me from 2005 to 2010 to go there all the time and work with many people who assisted me. Ephraim Ishaq was one of them. Dr. Khalid Dinna was one of them. Andreas Tuchel was one of them, in addition to local students who helped. Jonathan Loopstra was one of them. Uh, it was the quick and dirty way. And basically, for example, we made sure that every year there is a folder that describes the year in which we in which we digitized. And if we digitized a specific folder there, if things were in a folder, make sure you create a subfolder with that name so you know where it is. Um, in for example, in my case, when I archive my documents are in actual folders. So my son digitized them for me, and he created subfolder for every physical folder, so I know where things are. Of course, if there is funding, one can go to more sophisticated file naming and whatnot, but mostly think about the file name. The file name is very important, especially the Mardin archive. Some scholars are using it. We need a way to reference them in talks and in publications. So we decided, it's the year dot, and then the image file name is going to be the reference, so that we know how to go back and forth.
All right. Thank you, Melfono. So out of curiosity, so you mentioned like the practice of passing the encyclics from the patriarch, like, the priest is reading and the Shamosho holding the staff. So there are different variations, or personally people do say, like, slihog, and singing the song, the hymn before the reading the epistle and things like that. How these practices are evolved? Is there any insights that you can share, looking at the archives, looking at the practices people have?
Yeah, these encyclicals that we receive today are a modern phenomenon, probably 20th century phenomenon. We don't have many records of early encyclicals. Basically, when a bishop was appointed to a place, he was sent with a letter, and this letter was read. Whether in the church it was read or among the community, whether it was read with singing Shli Hagbayo before it and holding the staff, we don't know, because we don't have such records. But the business of writing encyclicals to the people begins with again in the modern time, and this periodic, that means every year on Easter, it starts a bit with Patriarch Elias, and then it becomes more and more regular, and now it's Christmas and Easter. But this is not an old tradition. This is a modern tradition.
No, thank you, Malfono. And so you talk about humbling oneself before the patriarch, before the God as well. So one step down, and emphasizing on the servanthood and the servitude and things like that. So that's interesting, but it may not be applicable in the present world. Like, so who you are, you need to communicate. And one more thing that I would like to ask about, like, what are the burning theological issues that you could find? I mean, the structure you mentioned, the content of these letters, apart from the personal and political issues that are being addressed to the Patriarchate. So your exploration, what are the theological issues? Just out of curiosity.
I doubt that you will find uh, theological issues discussed in these letters. Everything that I've seen is the sort of business that I have mentioned to you. Um, the closest that you will come to is dispute over the Syriac Catholic division. As you know, that was the period of time. 1700s is 1800s is the actual formation uh, of all of these Syriac Catholic parishes. So there's a lot of things about dispute, but it's dispute about not theological dispute. Maybe some of these letters will say, somebody said this or somebody said that. But I don't think you will find a lot of theological disputes. And the ones regarding with the Armenians, it's about again the disputes with the Armenian Church vis-a-vis Jerusalem and the holy places, but also the subjugation of the Syriac Church under the Patriarchate in Istanbul, the Armenian Patriarchate. The Ottomans, to make life easier for them, basically brought the Constantinople Patriarch, the Greek Patriarch, and said, "You are in charge of first, you are in charge of all the Christians." But then they figured out there are two camps of Christians. There are the Orthodox, like Byzantine Orthodox, and they are the non-Chalcedonians, the Armenians and Greeks and Copts. So basically, they established this patriarchate in Istanbul for that purpose, basically. Okay, you take care of these people, you bring us their taxes, and you are in charge. And that's how this whole system began. So you will find intercommunal things like this, or like the letter I mentioned with the Church of the East, that has theological implications, the one with the Church of the East, about ecumenism and whatnot, but not theology per se.
Thank you, Malfono. This is a wonderful session that we had. You gave practical examples how to examine even the scraps of paper. And, if you go back to old churches, you will be able to figure out the same way, you approach, like, looking at that, what other languages are being included, the linguistic part, how to address the bishops and patriarchs, and what are the burning issues in the church at that time. So all these things will be, even lay people who are in charge of the churches, and maybe those priests who are interested in going back and examining the archives. So there's a lot of things you presented, even the PowerPoint, the slides, and the practical examples that you gave. These are all insightful and very meaningful for the present generation, in order to preserve the culture, linguistics, the content, the language, and so on and so forth. And thank you once again, Malfono, for your time and your generosity and all the things that you are doing in the vineyard of our Lord and our God. So do you have any concluding remarks, Malfono?
Thank you very much. And my concluding remark is to stress, don't throw anything. Just a little anecdote. Sometimes in our Fanqiyotho and our books, there are bookmarks. So you can keep, we're on the Gudo, that, we are on this Sunday, so you can open the Fanqitho next day. Even those you have to be careful about before you throw them, because sometimes it's a letter that somebody received, they no longer need it, they folded it and they made it a bookmark. So, and sometimes it is the binding of a manuscript. They use old letters to strengthen the binding of a manuscript. So even such things, keep them.
Thank you. Thank you, Malfona. That's a great advice that we all need to follow and practice in our day-to-day life, especially we are dealing with an organization, a structure, and with the church. Thank you once again. Thank you, all viewers. Glory to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one true God. Amen.
Tawdi.
Tawdi.